So we made it up the spiral staircase here.
We must be like 310 feet, something like that. We're ways up here.
We need to put in like a Starbucks or something.
Yeah. This is some structural steel that was put in place to support Ad Astra back in the early 2000s. We did do new windows up here, new rails on the observation deck, new deck on the observation deck on the outside. The brass rail, handrail at the top is the original, so we kept that.
That's beautiful.
And then all of the copper, again, around the cupola up here, all the way up to Ad Astra is new and replaced. Better detailed, it's going to last forever.
Wow.
Let's go back down.
All right.
You can kind of see the backside of a lot of the wood framing that we had to replace to help support the new copper that we put on the outside.
Wow.
The dome's made up of these steel trusses with purlins going the horizontal direction, and then some sub-purlins that are used, and then on top of those tighter horizontal purlins are some terracotta tile that you see. It's really incredible to think about the original construction of the building here, though. Try and imagine the people that had to climb all the way up here and bring all the bricks and mortar and steel, and how they did that at the turn of the century.
They didn't have giant cranes.
No. It was tough enough for us, and it's just hard to imagine. Chris, one of the real interesting things that the architects and engineers did was these sconce lights on the inside of the rotunda here were originally a combination electric light going down and gas light coming up. And you can imagine the maintenance on those were just outrageous. They used to have a guy that was would tie off to this rail and jump out there and change light bulbs and stuff, but at some point he had to retire and they couldn't find anyone else to do that. So they really weren't taken care of, but the engineers came up with a way to take fiber optics from a light driver in this panel and feed out to a bulb, out to the light out there. So
Genius.
If the light goes out, you deal with it here.
There.
All the color that you see, all the decorative painting, stenciling, things on the roof or ceiling and walls were uncovered. They were discovered through stripping paint by artisans, and we determined the design of the stencil patterns, and we analyzed the paint samples that were underneath it. So we recreated all the colors, all the stencils, all the stencil colors, everything is what was there originally with the original design of the building.
Wow.
This is an interesting spot too, just quickly. This is again the original design of the building. Open skylight, open shaft down to the entrance into the house chamber. Before the project, this had been infilled with a floor here. This was an office. The skylight had been covered. So we opened up the office. We opened up the floor, built this rail to replicate the one that was below. This remained in place, and we're able to replicate that.
Wow.
Been so important to the building to be able to bring the sunlight back in and fill the building with light again.
Yeah.
And this is one of 4 primary skylights that came in that were uncovered and restored. The house chamber had been modified over the years. In fact, it had been painted different color schemes over the years, but they had painted over the ceilings. They'd painted over just about everything you see. In probably 96, 97, the legislators were complaining about paint chips landing on their desks from the ceiling, and they knew that they needed to do some work on the paint, so they hired a painter to come in and scrape the ceiling and come back and repaint. Well, he got up there and started scraping, and he started uncovering the evidence of some of the paintings up here. And he brought it to people's attention, and they said, you know, we really ought to check that out. So they asked him to expose it, and they found these murals, and so they hired someone to come back and do a restoration on these murals. These had been painted over.
Somebody
in their grand wisdom.
Yeah, when they covered up all the skylights and cut out the light and painted up this stuff. Why?
Yeah. It must have been offensive at some point,
I guess so.
Or it needed some repair, and it was easier to paint. But that's kind of the story. It had been covered up, but when that was exposed, people started thinking, what else is in this building that we don't know about? And we really need to do something to uncover that. and do a restoration. So that was the infancy of the restoration project, this exposure and the wisdom of the legislature to do something about it. We had a raised floor down here that we got rid of because it prevented any, again, disabled folks from coming in from the entrance to the house. And we created ramps and access throughout here, so not only visitors, but the legislators, if they're disabled, have access into the chamber too. The chandeliers are replicated from original photographs from what they're able to pull out. St. Louis Lighting Company out of St. Louis does this work, and they've just been tremendous on the project. As opposed to the Senate chamber, we had to replace all the desks in the House chamber just to make the dimensions work to have seating for everybody. So all this is brand new casework that was custom built for the House Legislative Assembly. You know, there really are a lot of people that travel around and make it a point to go to capitals to see things, and it's really interesting to see people that are traveling abroad coming here and going, wow, this is really outstanding, just stunning.
I've heard.
An interesting thing about this, when we started doing the demolition of the raised floor that was in here, it was tough coming out, real tough. And I had a personal family funeral I went to, and I was describing to my uncle, that was my father's partner in renter construction when I was growing up. I said, you know, we're tearing that out and it's just giving us fits. And he said, the House chamber? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, it should be tough because renter construction installed that in the 60s.
Renter's taking it out.
A little bit of history, yeah. Tear it up. There's the historic coat hanger.